A Fox News alert. Explosions rocking Kyiv and other cities across Ukraine. Officials there say at least 5 people have been killed, 12 others injured, and they're advising residents to take shelter as Putin escalates his war. You're watching Fox and Friends First on a Monday morning. I'm Todd Pyro.
And I'm Ashley Strohmeyer in for Carly Shimkus. This all comes as Putin is set to meet with his Security Council today, just days after that humiliating explosion that shut down a strategic bridge linking Russia to its annexed territory of Crimea. The Russian president blaming Kyiv for the attack and calling it an act of terrorism.
Rebekah Koffler is a Russian-born former U.S. defense intel officer and author of Putin's Playbook, and she joins us now. Rebekah, quite a morning to have you on the program. Did you expect this level of retaliation following the explosion of that Crimean bridge?
100% I expected it, Todd. Based on the Russian doctrine, attacks on Russian territory are supposed to be met with forceful retaliation. Just because the rest of the world does not acknowledge Crimea as Russian, the Putin regime do consider it Russian territory, and the same with the 4 annexed territories. And so Putin will not stop from here. He will only escalate. And our own president, Joe Biden, just recently warned us about the possibility of nuclear Armageddon, which is where we're heading right now.
Right, Rebecca, and I want to read this. Ukrainian President Zelensky said this morning. They are trying to destroy us and wipe us off the face of the earth. The air alarm does not stop throughout Ukraine. There are missiles hitting. Unfortunately, there are wounded and dead. Please do not leave shelters. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones. Let's hold on and be strong. So does it shock you at all that the Security Council was supposed to meet with Putin a couple of hours after this happened? That was what was supposed to happen, but yet here you have that top propagandist with the Kremlin. He was demanding a show of force against them. He said it's not responding to the enemy's actions, but breaking their plans and striking unexpected blows in directions where the enemy is not expecting them. And that seems to be exactly what happened this morning.
This is exactly Putin's playbook, Ashley. What Putin has done is a diversion. The narrative about the Security Council meeting later in the day is a classic deception to achieve tactical surprise. This retaliation should have been expected, including by President Biden and President Zelensky. We do pray for Ukrainian people. They need to brace. But what I want to mention here is that the Washington establishment does not explain to the American people why it is that Putin is fighting so hard. Ukraine is part of security perimeter for Russia, even though we don't recognize it. But it's the same thing as our Monroe Doctrine. Imagine if Russia or China tried to approach Canada or Mexico. No sane military commander, including Biden, although at this point many people question his sanity. We would not allow such thing to happen. And so neither does Putin. It's an existential battle for him, and he's going to do everything possible, and he's going to switch to a different strategy coming forward to make sure that Ukraine does not enter the Western orbit of influence, and especially NATO, about which he warned us many times. It's a red line for him, and he's not bluffing.
Rebecca, a very disturbing update from our own Trey Yingst. He's saying this morning the Russians are aiming at civilian targets in Ukraine. This is why officials there stressing the need for more air defense systems. This attack is significant, Rebecca. As you know, this is the first time they've hit the city center of Kyiv in a long time. They did a little in the outskirts, but this is really the first time in months that they've gone for the heart of Kyiv. We know that this bridge, not only was it a link to transporting troops and supplies, this was beyond embarrassing for Putin because this was believed to be a pet project of his. So taking all this into account and also adding to the fact that he is getting, Putin that is, a lot of pressure from Russian hardliners. How much do you attribute to the hardliner pressure? How much do you attribute to your, what you call, Putin's doctrine here?
It's not just the hardlines, Todd. The entire Putin's establishment, his regime is behind it. Remember, he spent 2 decades planning this. It's not just Putin. He can't do it himself. The entire doctrine was developed by the general staff. And my intelligence assessment is that Putin is switching strategy to what is called the new generation warfare, where he's going to target exactly what he's targeting right now, the civilian infrastructure, with cyber attacks, space warfare operations, underwater strikes, just like what we saw with the Nord Stream. We have a piece on Fox Digital right now on the website called Space Armageddon. It's not just nuclear Armageddon that's on the table here. So things are unfolding exactly how Putin has planned. And unfortunately, our own security apparatus misdirected intelligence resources when they should have been paying to the Russian threat. They were doing investigation after investigation of former President Trump, and the non-existent collusion theory that they themselves concocted instead of taking seriously the Russian threat in developing first a deterrence strategy and next a de-escalation strategy. And President Biden at this point has no de-escalation strategy, and that is very dangerous. We're potentially being dragged into another, experimental project like we just had in Afghanistan. But we don't have 20 years because Putin has nuclear weapons and he holds advantage in tactical nuclear weapons 10-1. We have 200, the Russians have 2,000, and he has practiced many times on how to use it.
And Rebecca, speaking of Biden and Putin and this whole idea of nuclear war, President Biden warned of possible nuclear Armageddon last week, saying, quote, Putin was not joking when he talks about potential use of tactical nuclear weapons or biological or chemical weapons. I don't think there's any such thing as the ability to easily use a tactical nuclear weapon and not end up with Armageddon. I know when people heard this, people really started thinking this could be a possibility. And with what happened this morning, what do you make of those comments?
President Biden is 100% correct. He finally has acknowledged that he has brought us indeed on the brink of nuclear Armageddon. But I want to clarify, the nuclear strikes are not expected on U.S. homeland. He does not need to scare the American people. That would be reckless. However, there are several steps right now on what the Russians have developed, escalation dominance. There's the escalation ladder. As I mentioned, strikes, non-kinetic strikes, cyber intrusions, space operations are expected, including on the homeland, but it depends on what we do. If we decide to de-escalate, sit down at the table, and actually make sure that Zelensky does talk to Putin about how to end this conflict, how to end the suffering of the Ukrainian people, and how to avoid putting American and European civilian infrastructure into the crosshairs of Putin, then there's a possibility to de-escalate. But there's going to be an adult in the room right now, just like we had one back during the Cuban Missile Crisis, who is going to tell everyone to knock it off, get to the table, and stop this war.
Be sure to read Rebecca's book, Putin's Playbook. Important now more than ever. Rebekah Koffler, thank you very much.
Thanks, Rebecca.